You're not even half as good as my father." The words cut through the air like a blade, leaving behind a silence so heavy it almost crushed the room. In that moment, the weight of betrayal settled in, not just as an insult, but as a wound that could never be ignored again. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I have lived in Colorado my whole life, in a small town tucked between the mountains where the air smells of pine, and the mornings carry a crisp stillness that makes a man pause before the day begins. My name is Thomas Miller, and at 68 years old, I often find myself walking through the halls of the house I built with my own 2 hands, running my fingers along the wooden beams I cut, sanded, and joined together decades ago. Every nail, every groove carries a memory, some sweet, some painful, all of them a reminder of the life I carved out through sweat and perseverance. I was a carpenter for over 40 years, the kind of man people in town called when they needed a table that would last generations, or a porch that could withstand winter storms. It was never glamorous work, but it was honest, and it paid enough to keep food on the table and clothes on my daughter's back. My late wife, Margaret, used to say that my hands were my greatest gift and my greatest curse. Gifted because I could shape raw lumber into something beautiful. Cursed because those same hands were often too calloused to feel the softness of life. When she passed away far too soon, those hands became the only thing that kept me from falling apart. They built not only furniture, but also a sense of purpose, a rhythm to keep grief at bay. Raising Emily on my own was the hardest job I ever faced. She was just a girl when her mother died, and I swore to her and to myself that I would give her a good life no matter what it cost me. I turned down opportunities to move to bigger cities or to chase contracts that might have brought more money. Instead, I stayed rooted in this town so she would always have stability, always know where home was. My world narrowed to her needs, her schooling, her dreams. There were nights I worked late in the shop by lantern light, sanding cabinets or carving banisters, so I could afford her school supplies or the new pair of shoes she wanted for the dance. Emily grew into a fine young woman, bright, beautiful, with the same stubborn streak her mother had. I watched with pride when she graduated from college, and even more pride, mixed with a little sadness, when she married David. At first, I wanted to believe he was a good man. He was confident, articulate, already climbing the ladder as a young attorney in Denver. But there was something in his eyes, a sharpness that always seemed to measure people, as if he were weighing their worth on a scale only he could read. Still, for Emily's sake, I welcomed him, told myself my doubts were only the worries of a protective father. Now, I live alone in my old wooden house, a place filled with the echoes of laughter that used to bounce off its walls. My days follow a quiet routine. I rise early, brew a pot of strong coffee, and sit on the porch while the sun stretches its first light across the peaks. Sometimes I walk into town, nodding at neighbors, stopping at the hardware store where folks still greet me as Tom the Carpenter. Other times I visit my old workshop, now more of a storage shed, where the smell of sawdust lingers like a familiar ghost. Life is steady, but steady is not the same as full. There are evenings when I set the table for one, and the silence presses down heavier than any beam I ever hoisted. Holidays, once bright with expectation, have become days of waiting for Emily to call, for the sound of a car pulling up the gravel driveway. She and David live only an hour away in the city, but the distance feels larger with every passing year. Still, I hold on to hope. I picture Emily bringing her children here someday, their laughter filling the empty spaces. I imagine David softening, learning to appreciate the warmth of a family meal over the prestige of his father's reputation. Perhaps it is naive, but a man who has spent his life building things learns to believe in foundations, even when cracks appear. As the season turns and the first chill of autumn rolls in, I prepare the house for another round of family visits. I polished the old dining table, the one I carved from oak when Emily was a child, and I set aside recipes Margaret once loved. I want Emily to remember where she came from, to feel the love that still lingers in every corner of this home. Deep down, though, a shadow lingers. Something in David's dismissive glances, his condescending tone, tells me that not everyone values the same things I do. Yet for now, in this chapter of Quiet Before the Storm, I let myself believe in the simple beauty of my life. The mountains still stand, the wood still holds, and my heart, though scarred, still beats with the steady rhythm of hope. If you're still watching and feeling the weight of this beginning, drop a number 1 in the comments so I know you're here with me. Sunday evenings have always carried a special weight for me. Growing up, they meant family dinners, long conversations, and a gentle reminder that no matter how hard the week had been, home was where the world slowed down. I wanted that same tradition to remain alive, even if it was just me setting the table these days. On that particular evening, I dusted off the oak dining table I had built when Emily was 12, polished the old silverware that once belonged to Margaret, and prepared a meal meant to honor the bonds of family. The smell of slow-roasted beef filled the house, mingling with the faint scent of pine drifting in from the open windows. I wanted everything to be just right. I had marinated the meat overnight, seasoned the potatoes the way Emily used to like them, and baked an apple pie from scratch. The dishes were simple, maybe too simple by modern standards, but they carried memories. As I laid out the plates, I imagined Emily walking through the door, catching that first familiar scent, and smiling the way she used to when she was a child, running in from the cold. When they arrived, the air shifted almost immediately. Emily gave me a quick hug, warm but distracted, her eyes darting around as if measuring the distance between herself and both me and David. My son-in-law stepped into the living room with his usual brisk confidence, scanning the place like a critic assessing a second-rate performance. His tailored suit looked too sharp for a casual dinner, his cologne too heavy for the small wooden house. "This place hasn't changed at all," he said casually, his eyes on the old rug near the fireplace. His tone carried the weight of judgment more than observation. I forced a smile. "Some things are built to last." We sat down at the table, and almost immediately the tension took a seat with us. David's eyes moved from the wooden chairs to the faded curtains and then to the meal. "Quite a traditional spread," he remarked, slicing into the beef. "My father always preferred more elaborate dinners, lamb rack with rosemary or salmon with saffron." Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She didn't say a word, only lowered her gaze to the plate. I caught the flicker of discomfort in her eyes, but she stayed silent, letting his comparison hang in the air. My chest tightened, but I reminded myself to breathe. The meal went on in the same fashion. Every few bites, David offered another offhand remark. "This table, is it original? Looks rustic," or "Your wine collection is modest, isn't it?" Each comment came with a smile that was too polite, too deliberate. Emily, my own daughter, kept her silence, as though she had long since accepted these remarks as normal. I wanted to reach across the table, hold her hand, and ask her why she let him speak this way, but the words never left my mouth. When I brought out the apple pie, a dish Margaret had taught me to bake, I felt a flicker of pride. The crust was golden, the filling rich with cinnamon. I set it down gently, hoping it might soften the sharp edges of the evening. For a brief moment, as the sweet aroma filled the room, I thought we might share something genuine. But as I placed a slice in front of David, he leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and let out a low chuckle. His eyes met mine, steady and cold. "You know, Thomas," he said, "you're not even half as good as my father." The words cut through the air like a blade. I froze, the serving knife still in my hand. Emily stiffened, her eyes glued to her plate, refusing to look at me. Not a word of protest left her lips. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm I'd ever weathered. For a heartbeat, I tried to convince myself I had misheard. Perhaps it was a slip of the tongue, a poor joke, but his expression told me otherwise. He wasn't joking. He wanted to wound. He wanted to remind me of his measure of worth, and of my supposed lack of it. The walls of my house seemed to lean in closer, every picture frame, every piece of furniture suddenly a witness to my humiliation. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I felt the old ache of being dismissed, reduced, diminished in the eyes of a man who believed pedigree outweighed character. Emily remained still, her silence louder than his insult. In that moment, I realized the distance I had been feeling wasn't just physical. Something deeper had been eroding between us, and David's words were merely the surface crack of a foundation already weakening. I placed the knife back on the table slowly, pushed my chair back, and rose to my feet. I didn't shout, I didn't argue. Instead, I let the silence carry the weight of my resolve. In that single gesture, I knew that the life I had lived quietly and the sacrifices I had made without complaint were about to collide with a truth I could no longer ignore. The storm had begun, and I was no longer willing to weather it in silence. If you're still watching and sensing how the tension is quietly building, leave a number 1 below to let me know you're following closely. The weight of David's words still hung in the air, sharp and humiliating. I could have sat there and let the insult fester inside me, like I had done with so many small slights before, but something inside me shifted that night. I straightened my back, pushed my chair away from the table, and stood tall in the home I had built with my own hands. My voice came out low and steady, but it carried more power than any shout could have. "If your father is half the man you claim," I said, staring directly at David, "then perhaps he should be the one covering the mortgage payments you've been unable to manage." For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Emily's fork clattered onto her plate, her eyes wide with confusion. David's smug smile faltered, his lips parting just slightly as if he hadn't expected resistance from me. "What mortgage payments?" Emily whispered, turning to her husband. David's face drained of color. His carefully constructed mask of confidence cracked in front of us both. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. I pressed on, unwilling to let the truth remain buried any longer. "For the past year," I continued, "I've been paying the interest on the Denver condo, 12 months of checks pulled from my own savings account to keep that apartment from slipping into foreclosure. I didn't do it for you, David. I did it for Emily, for my daughter, who deserves stability even when her husband's decisions put her home at risk." Emily gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "Dad, I didn't know." "No, you didn't," I said gently, meeting her eyes. "Because he didn't want you to." David finally found his voice, though it shook with strain. "I was going to fix it, Thomas. The market turned against me. The timing was bad. I just needed more time." "More time?" I asked, my voice rising. "I've given you 12 months of time. 12 months of sacrificing what little I had left from decades of hard work. Do you know how many nights I skipped filling my own prescriptions because I was writing checks to cover your mistakes? Do you know how many repairs on this house I've delayed just to make sure you two didn't lose yours?" Emily turned to him, her face pale. "David, is this true?" He rubbed his temple, avoiding her gaze. "It was temporary. I didn't want to worry you." I could see the panic flicker in his eyes as he realized the fortress of lies he had built was collapsing. I felt an odd mix of grief and release wash over me. For months, I had carried this secret burden, convincing myself I was helping my daughter by enabling her husband. Now, finally, the truth was out in the open. Emily's voice trembled. "All this time, Dad has been keeping us afloat, and you let me believe everything was fine?" David's jaw clenched. "I was protecting you." "No," I interjected firmly. "You were protecting your pride." The tension around the table thickened until it felt suffocating. Emily sat back in her chair, stunned and silent. David's hands shook slightly, betraying the fear behind his forced composure. I looked at them both, and I knew I couldn't continue down this road any longer. "Starting this month," I declared, "I will no longer pay a dime toward your mortgage. Not 1 cent. If you want to keep that condo, you'll have to find another way. I have carried you far enough." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripple of shock spread across the room. Emily blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the ground shifting beneath her. David's face hardened, anger replacing panic. "You can't just walk away," he snapped. "If you stop paying, we'll lose the place. Emily will suffer. Is that what you want, Thomas? To see your daughter homeless?" I locked eyes with him, my jaw set. What I want is for my daughter to open her eyes, to see the man she married for who he really is. And what I need is to stop sacrificing my life so you can keep pretending to be someone you're not. David's words stumbled out, defensive and hollow. "I told you, it was just a setback. I had plans." "Plans?" I cut in. "You gambled with her future, and when it went wrong, you hid behind my back. That's not a plan. That's cowardice." Emily's face crumpled, torn between disbelief and heartbreak. For the first time, I saw the faintest glimmer of doubt in her eyes, the fragile beginning of realization. My chest ached at the sight, but it was necessary. She deserved truth, no matter how painful. The table that once held Sunday dinners of laughter now bore witness to a family unraveling. I knew this confrontation was only the beginning. The foundation had cracked, and the rest would follow. But as I stood there, finally speaking what had been buried for too long, I felt the first taste of freedom. If you're still watching and the first shock hit harder than expected, type number 1 in the comments to show me you're keeping up. The silence after my declaration stretched so long that I could hear the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. Emily's face had drained of color, her hands trembling in her lap. David sat rigid, his jaw locked, as if he were calculating his next move with the precision of a lawyer in court. I remained standing, unwilling to back down. I had finally drawn the line, and I wasn't about to erase it. "Dad," Emily said softly, her voice pleading. "Please, don't say that. David will fix this. He'll find a way. We just need a little more time." Her words cut into me more deeply than David's insult had. My daughter, who I had raised with every ounce of strength I had left after her mother died, was still defending him even after learning the truth. She looked so fragile, torn between loyalty to me and to the man she had chosen to marry. David leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his tone measured but defensive. "Thomas, you don't understand how volatile the market's been. I had deals lined up, solid prospects, that collapsed at the last minute. It wasn't incompetence, it was circumstance. Any man in my position would have faced the same losses." I looked him dead in the eye. "A man in your position should have been honest with his wife, should have been honest with his family. Instead, you built your house of cards on lies and let me bleed my savings dry to cover for you." His face reddened, but he pressed on. "I didn't want Emily to worry. I wanted to shield her. I thought if I could just hold out long enough, the next case, the next client, would turn things around." Emily's eyes flicked between us, wide and fearful. "David, you told me we were fine, that the condo was secure, that the bills were covered." He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't want you to panic. I was protecting you." I slammed my palm against the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Protecting her? By letting her father sell off his savings to keep your head above water? That isn't protection. That's cowardice." Emily flinched at my words, tears welling in her eyes. She turned to her husband, her voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let my dad, of all people, carry the burden?" David's mask slipped, frustration pouring out. "Because he offered. He insisted. What was I supposed to do? Turn down the money and risk losing everything?" I leaned closer, my voice low but firm. "You were supposed to be a man. You were supposed to take responsibility." The words landed with a thud, and for a moment, David had no response. He looked away, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. Emily sobbed quietly, torn between the two men she loved. "Dad, please don't cut us off now." "We'll make it work, I promise. David just needs a little more time. If you stop helping us, everything falls apart." Her desperation twisted in my chest like a knife. I wanted to hold her, to tell her I'd fix everything like I always had, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. I had already given too much. "I can't keep rescuing you," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "If I continue, you'll never learn. And Emily, you'll never see the truth of the man you married." David's composure snapped. He pushed back his chair and stood, pointing a finger at me. "You're destroying this family, Thomas. You're the reason Emily is crying right now. You think you're helping her, but all you're doing is making her choose between her husband and her father." The accusation stung, but I didn't flinch. I had expected it. I met his glare with steady eyes. "No, David. I'm not making her choose. You did that the moment you lied to her, the moment you used my sacrifices to prop up your pride." The room seemed smaller, suffocating. Emily buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. David's breathing grew ragged, his face twisted with anger. And me, I stood my ground, my heart heavy but resolute. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the quiet father, the willing provider, the man in the background holding everything together. I was a man who had finally said enough. The argument fizzled out, not because we had found resolution, but because we had exhausted the words that could be spoken. Emily remained silent, caught in the storm between us. David's eyes burned with resentment, and mine with a painful clarity. I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The truth had cracked the facade, but there were still layers of lies waiting to be unearthed. As I looked at David, I saw not just a man cornered by his failures, but a man still hiding something. The worst was yet to come, and I could feel it pressing against the walls of my home like a storm waiting to break. If you're still watching and realizing how fragile things are becoming, write number 1 below so I know you're right here with me. I had always believed that family matters should be resolved at home, around a table, or in the quiet of a living room. But there comes a point when private conversations are no longer enough, when lies have grown too thick to untangle without help. That is why, 2 days after the disastrous dinner, I called Emily and David to meet me at my lawyer's office in town. It wasn't a request, it was an ultimatum. The air inside the office was crisp and heavy with formality. Leather chairs lined the walls, law books stacked high on mahogany shelves, and the scent of polished wood carried a seriousness that my old home never could. My attorney, James Parker, a man I had known for decades, sat quietly at the head of the table, his face grave. On the desk lay a folder stuffed with documents I had spent the past week gathering. Bank statements, mortgage stubs, and, most importantly, something far darker. Emily sat beside David, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting nervously between me and James. David leaned back in his chair, his expression tight, but still carrying that faint smugness, as if he believed he could argue his way out of anything. "Why are we here?" Emily asked softly, her voice trembling. "Because," I said, sliding the folder toward James, "there are truths that need to be laid bare." James cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. He pulled out one document and placed it in front of Emily. "Mrs. Carter, this is a copy of a loan agreement taken out 6 months ago in both your name and your father's." Emily frowned, scanning the page, her brow furrowed. This isn't possible. I never signed this. Dad, did you?" I shook my head firmly. "No, Emily. I never signed it either." Her eyes widened, confusion turning quickly into dread. James tapped the bottom of the page. "The signatures here, though resembling Thomas Miller's, are not genuine. We've had them examined by a handwriting specialist. They are forgeries." Emily's gaze whipped toward David. He shifted in his seat, his composure beginning to crack. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Those specialists get it wrong all the time. Besides, what reason would I have to do something like that?" I leaned forward, my voice sharp. "Because you were drowning, David. Because the condo payments and your so-called investments weren't enough to feed the lifestyle you insisted on maintaining. You needed more money, and you were too proud or too afraid to ask honestly. So, you stole my name. You dragged me into your mess without my knowledge." Emily's lips trembled as she turned back to the paper. David, tell me this isn't true. He ran a hand across his forehead, his cool facade crumbling. Emily, I did it for us. I thought if I could just buy some time, I'd land the big case, the bonus, something to cover it all. I didn't want you to know how bad things were. Tears filled her eyes. You forged my father's signature? You involved him in this without asking? Do you realize what you've done? David slammed his hand on the table, startling her. I did what I had to do. You think your father would have helped if I'd told him? He already looks down on me. I felt my blood boil. Don't you dare twist this around. I looked down on the lies, not on you. But now you've proven you'll drag anyone down with you rather than face the consequences of your own failures. James interjected quietly, his tone calm but firm. Mr. Miller has grounds to press charges. Forgery, fraud. These are serious crimes, David. The court will not be sympathetic. Emily sobbed, her shoulders shaking. She looked at me with eyes full of pain. Dad, what happens now? I swallowed hard, my own heart heavy. What happens now is that I stop protecting him. For too long, I've carried the weight of his mistakes, but the law exists for a reason, Emily. He chose this path. David stood abruptly, pointing at me with a shaking finger. His face was flushed, his voice loud and bitter. You think you're some kind of hero, Thomas? You're nothing but an old man stuck in the past. You don't understand modern finance. You don't understand risk. You should be grateful I even let Emily marry into your antiquated world. His words were meant to wound, and they did. But behind the rage in his eyes, I saw fear. The fear of a man whose empire of lies had finally crumbled. I met his glare steadily. No more lies. No more rescue. From this moment on, I let the law decide your fate. I will not shield you again. The room went still. Emily wept openly, covering her face with her hands. David's chest heaved with fury, but there was nothing left for him to say. James began gathering the documents, his expression grim. And I sat there, my hands trembling slightly, knowing that the war we had all been avoiding had finally broken into the open. The ride back from the lawyer's office was suffocating. Emily sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the mountains rolled past, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The silence between us was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of gravel beneath the tires. I wanted to speak, to offer her comfort, but I knew the words she needed couldn't come from me this time. She had to wrestle with the truth on her own. When we reached my house, she followed me inside without a word. She drifted into the living room and sat on the old sofa, the one she used to curl up on as a child while Margaret read her bedtime stories. Now she sat stiff and hollow, her eyes red, her breathing shallow. David had refused to ride back with us, claiming he had business to handle. I suspected he was scrambling for excuses, for some last shred of control over the crumbling image he had built. Whatever he was plotting, it no longer mattered. The decision rested squarely in Emily's hands now. I set a pot of coffee on the stove and leaned against the counter, watching her from the doorway. Her shoulders trembled, and when she finally looked at me, I saw a storm raging in her eyes. Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible, how did it come to this? I walked over slowly, lowering myself into the armchair across from her. Because lies have a way of piling up, Em. One small deception turns into another, and before you know it, you're standing on a mountain of them, waiting for it all to collapse. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I loved him. I believed in him. Every time he told me things would get better, I held on to that hope. Was I blind? No, I said gently. You weren't blind. You were trusting. You wanted to believe in the man you married. That's not weakness, it's love. But love without truth can't survive, not for long. She buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled. What am I supposed to do now? Before I could answer, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway reached us. Moments later, the front door creaked open and David stepped inside. His tie was loosened, his eyes desperate, his face pale. He carried none of his usual arrogance, only the look of a man cornered. "Emily," he said, rushing toward her, "please, hear me out." She recoiled slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You forged my father's signature, David. You dragged him into debt without telling me. How am I supposed to hear you after that?" David dropped to his knees in front of her, grabbing her hands. "I made mistakes, I admit that. But I can change. I'll go to therapy, I'll get a stable job, I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on me. We can fix this." I watched from my chair, my jaw tight. His words were polished, rehearsed, like the closing argument of a trial. They might have swayed a jury, but I wasn't a jury. I was a father, and I could see the fear beneath the performance. "Emily," I said quietly, "listen to him if you must. But remember this, you don't owe him your silence or your sacrifice. You have the right to choose what's best for you, not just what spares him." David shot me a glare, but quickly turned his attention back to Emily. "He wants to tear us apart. Don't let him. Your father doesn't understand the pressures we're under. He's old-fashioned. He doesn't get it." Emily pulled her hands free. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice grew stronger. "Stop blaming him. This isn't about Dad. This is about you and the choices you made. You lied to me, David. Again and again. And every time I defended you, I was the fool who looked the other way." He reached for her again, but she stood, pacing the room. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive this. I don't know if I want to spend the rest of my life waiting for the next lie to surface." I rose slowly, my voice steady. "Emily, I won't tell you what to do. This is your choice, but know this, I will not cover for him again. If the law takes its course, I won't intervene. You have to decide where you stand." The room fell silent except for Emily's uneven breaths. She looked from me to David, her face torn with anguish. For years she had leaned on me for guidance, but now her future rested on a decision only she could make. She finally stopped pacing, standing in the center of the room, her chest rising and falling, as if every breath carried the weight of her world. She looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears, then turned to David, who stared back at her with pleading desperation. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking but resolute, "I've made my choice." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. But she said nothing more. The silence stretched, deeper and sharper than any argument. I felt my heart pound in my chest as the cliff edge of her decision loomed before us. If you're still watching and feeling the pressure of a choice that could change everything, comment number 1 below so I can see you're still with me. I woke before sunrise, the way I used to when a big job waited in the workshop. The house was quiet, that deep, thoughtful kind of quiet that comes after a storm. For a moment, I forgot where the storm had left us. Then I saw the extra pair of shoes beside the door and remembered. Emily had fallen asleep in her old room, the one with the faded quilt Margaret stitched the winter our girl turned 12. There was relief in that sight and a weight, too. Decisions do not end when words are spoken. They begin there. I brewed coffee and stepped onto the porch. The air carried the resinous bite of pine and the faint damp of the river. When the sky brightened, I could see the first yellow tips of aspen leaves, a slow turning that always felt like honesty. Nearby, something rustled in the scrub. Deer, probably. The world kept moving as if our lives were not being measured and weighed in town talk and legal ink. I wished I could borrow that unconcern, just for a morning. Emily came out wrapped in a cardigan I recognized, sleeves pushed to her elbows the way she wore them in high school. Her eyes were swollen, but there was a steadiness in her posture I hadn't seen in years. She sat beside me without speaking. We watched the ridge take the light. The steam from her cup drifted and dissolved. The silence between us felt different from last night's. Not a gulf, not a punishment, more like a bandage placed over a wound that needed stillness to knit. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "I'm going to stay here a while." I nodded. I did not tell her it was the right choice. I did not tell her it was overdue. I said only, "The room's yours. By mid-morning, the town had found its rhythm. Delivery trucks rattling down Main, the diner door clanging as the breakfast crowd thinned. With rhythm came rumor. News in a small place is like smoke under a door. It enters whether you invite it or not. I stopped at the hardware store for sandpaper, and a clerk I'd known since he was a boy lowered his voice and asked if I was doing all right. On the sidewalk, Mrs. Avery patted my forearm too long. Somewhere behind the pity, I could feel the sharpening of curiosity. The word fraud travels faster than any car on Highway 50. Back home, Emily moved through the room slowly, touching the everyday objects she'd once taken for granted. A wobbly picture frame I never got around to fixing, the sun-bleached rug where she learned to crawl, the pantry shelf Margaret marked with pencil lines to measure her height. She kept busy without purpose until busyness failed to distract. Then she sat at the kitchen table and stared at nothing. Grief, I've learned, is a tide. It recedes only to return with a different shape. She helped me with small chores, and in that wordless labor something eased. We replaced a porch board that had cupped in the summer heat, set a screw in a squealing hinge, emptied the workshop wood stove of ash that had overwintered. Her hands were not meant for chisels and mallets, but she found a rhythm with the broom, and the floor grew clean in careful lanes. Work is a bridge, even when it spans only a morning. When David's name appeared on my phone, I let it ring. He had left the house the previous night with anger the color of panic, and the absence of calls until now was eloquence enough. Emily looked at the screen, then at me, and shook her head. She did not ask to answer. There are choices a father cannot make for a daughter twice grown, once into adulthood, and again into truth. As the day pulled forward, whispers gathered into a hum. James Parker left a message saying preliminary inquiries were underway. He spoke carefully, the way lawyers do when the ground ahead is uncertain and the weather is turning. Emily listened to the voicemail, then replayed it, and folded both hands as if she were praying without words. In the late afternoon, we drove to the river overlook, a short road I take when my chest feels tight. The water moved with autumn's calm, not the racing rush of snowmelt, not the sluggish drag of high summer. On the far bank, a fisherman worked a slow cast, line bright as wire in the slanting light. I told Emily how her mother loved this bend, how Margaret would sit on the tailgate and read while I mended a tool or sharpened a blade. I kept the story spare. Grief is a guest. You offer it a chair, not a speech. We ate a plain supper, eggs and toast and a sliced peach. After the dishes were rinsed and set to dry, the phone rang again. This time it was James himself, not his assistant. I put the call on speaker so Emily could hear. He spoke of timelines, of subpoenas, of handwriting reports already requested by an investigator I knew only by initials. He spoke of a second instrument the bank had flagged, something I hadn't seen, and my stomach tightened in a way that felt like the start of a long winter. When the call ended, Emily stood motionless, hands braced on the edge of the sink. The faucet dripped a slow, indifferent beat. She turned to me, face pale, eyes bright with a fear that had finally found a name. What if he drags us down with him? I had no cheap reassurance to give her, no fatherly thunderbolt to clear the sky. I told her what I believed and what I could promise. The law is a path, not a cliff. We would walk it step by step. We would tell the truth every time. We would not hurry grief or bargain with integrity. The rest would be weather. Outside, the evening gathered along the fence lines and under the porch, blue and steady. I set another log on the fire and waited for it to catch. The flame took, thin at first, then sure. Somewhere beyond the dark, a car passed on the county road, taillights fading, as if the night itself had exhaled. I listened to the woods settle and the house answer, old bones speaking in small creaks, and I thought, consequences are not punishment, they are the price of reality. We had begun paying. The morning after James's call, the house felt restless, as though even the walls were waiting for something to break loose. Emily hadn't slept. I could hear her footsteps pacing in the room, above mine long after midnight, then the soft creak of the stairs at dawn. She came into the kitchen pale and drawn, her hair tied back hastily, her eyes rimmed red. She sat at the table without touching the coffee I poured. "Dad," she said finally, her voice husky, What if they come for me too? What if they think I knew? I set my mug down carefully. Emily, the truth is on your side. You didn't sign those papers. You didn't hide the bills. You've been living in the dark just as much as I have. She shook her head. But I'm his wife. Doesn't that mean I share the shame? Doesn't that mean people will look at me and see his mistakes as mine? I wanted to tell her that people's opinions don't matter, but I've lived long enough to know they do. In a town this size, whispers travel faster than trains. Still, shame and guilt are different from responsibility, and she needed to hear that difference clearly. Listen, I said, leaning forward. The law looks for actions, not gossip. If you stand up and tell the truth, no one can drag you down but yourself. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. I don't know if I'm strong enough. I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine. Strength isn't something you wait to feel. It's something you decide to practice, even when it shakes you. That afternoon, I called James and arranged a private meeting for Emily. At first, she resisted, afraid of what she might hear. But when we pulled up outside his office, she straightened her shoulders and walked in on her own. I waited in the car, watching through the glass as she sat across from him. I could see the way her hands fidgeted, the way she pressed them to her lap to stop the trembling. When she came out an hour later, she looked exhausted but different, lighter somehow. In the car, she whispered, I asked him everything I was afraid to ask. What happens if David is charged? What happens to me? And he told me the truth. If I cooperate, if I stay clean, I'll be safe. Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time, I feel like I can breathe. But it hurts too, Dad. It hurts to know the man I trusted put me in this place. I pulled the car onto the road slowly, letting her words settle. Hurt means you're still alive, Em. Hurt means you still care, but you're learning to stand apart from him. That's growth, even if it feels like breaking. On the drive back, she cried quietly, staring at the mountains, as if their permanence could steady her. I didn't interrupt. Sometimes silence is the only medicine grief will accept. That evening, I made stew from what was left in the pantry: potatoes, carrots, a little beef I had been saving. Emily helped slice the vegetables, her movements steady now, almost meditative. We ate at the kitchen table with the lamp casting a warm circle of light. It wasn't celebration, but it was peace, and that was enough. After dinner, she lingered in the living room, running her hand along the spines of the books Margaret once collected. She pulled one down, a worn novel I had read aloud to her when she was 10. She smiled faintly. I used to think life was like stories, Dad. That the bad parts would pass quickly, that the good would always return. Stories, I said, are just shorter than life. The bad parts take longer out here, but the good can come back too, if you let it. She looked at me then, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of resilience in her eyes. Later, as I cleaned the kitchen, headlights swept across the front windows. A car door slammed. I walked to the porch, heart tightening. The night air was sharp, the gravel crunching under unfamiliar shoes. There, standing in the edge of the driveway, was David. He didn't move closer, didn't call out. He just stood with his hands in his pockets, the shadows hiding his face. The glow from the headlights made him a silhouette, unreadable, unsettling. Emily came to the doorway behind me. She froze, her breath catching. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The night pressed in heavy around us, and all I could think was that the storm we had barely survived was circling back. The headlights cut out, and silence rushed in, thick and uneasy. David stood at the end of the driveway, half shrouded in shadow, his shoulders slumped, but his stance defiant. Emily hovered behind me in the doorway, clutching the frame as though bracing herself against a storm. I could feel her breath quicken, but her voice was steady when she whispered, "Dad, don't let him in." I stepped forward, onto the porch. The boards creaked under my weight, grounding me. "What do you want, David?" My voice carried across the cool night air. He lifted his hands from his pockets, palms open as if in surrender. "I just need to talk. Please, Thomas. Please, Emily. You have to hear me out." Emily's voice rang sharp. "No, David. We've heard enough lies." He flinched but pressed on. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Everything I did to keep us afloat. I thought if I could buy time, I'd fix it before anyone got hurt. Emily, you have to believe me. You're my wife. You're my whole world." She stepped onto the porch beside me, her spine straightening. For the first time, she looked directly at him, no longer hiding behind my presence. Her face was pale but resolute. "You forged my father's name. You dragged us into debt. You lied to me every single day. That's not love, David. That's selfishness." His voice cracked. "I can change. I'll get help. I'll take whatever job I can. Just don't give up on me. I can't survive without you." Emily shook her head slowly, tears glistening under the porch light. "You already lost me. You lost me the moment you chose pride over honesty." David stumbled forward a few steps, his desperation rising. "Don't say that. Don't do this to us." I raised a hand, firm and final. "That's enough. You had chance after chance. My daughter stood by you while you lied, and I covered your debts until I had nothing left to give. Those days are over. You'll face the consequences of your actions now. The law will decide your future, not us." His jaw tightened, but his shoulders sagged, as though the fight drained from him. "So, that's it? After everything I tried to build, you'll just throw me away?" "No," I said quietly. "You threw yourself away the moment you chose deceit. You can't blame anyone else for that." For a moment, he stood there, his face twisted between anger and grief. Then his hands dropped to his sides. His eyes flicked to Emily one last time, searching for some trace of mercy. But she gave him none. Her silence was louder than any rejection could have been. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes, and the slam of the door echoed through the night. The engine roared, headlights flared once more, and then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness down the road. Emily collapsed against me, sobbing into my chest. But this time her tears were different. They weren't the tears of fear or confusion. They were tears of release. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as tightly as I had when she was a child, waking from nightmares. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." I stroked her hair gently. "It's the end of one chapter, Em. But tomorrow, a new one begins." We stood on the porch until the night grew still again, the stars sharp above the ridgeline. When we finally went inside, she seemed lighter, as though a chain had been cut from her shoulders. The next morning, the phone rang just as I was pouring coffee. James's voice was calm but firm. "Thomas, the papers have been filed. The case against David is moving forward. The investigation is now in the hands of the court." I thanked him, hung up, and sat at the table. Emily walked in moments later, her hair loose around her face, her eyes puffy from crying but steadier than I had ever seen them. "Was that James?" she asked. I nodded. "It's official now. Whatever happens next, it's out of our hands." She exhaled, a long, trembling breath, then managed a faint smile. "Good. I don't want to carry his lies anymore." I reached for her hand. "You don't have to. You're free of them now. The future's yours to write." She squeezed my hand back, her eyes shining with both sorrow and determination. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was a woman who had walked through fire and emerged changed, stronger, clearer, ready for whatever came next. The days that followed David's departure were quieter than I expected. The silence in the house no longer felt suffocating. It felt healing. Emily stayed with me, and though she carried sorrow in her eyes, there was also something new taking root, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. I would often catch her sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open, jotting thoughts down, as if writing them out might anchor her in this new chapter of her life. One afternoon, while the sun poured through the living room windows, Emily joined me on the porch. She carried 2 cups of coffee, one for each of us, and handed mine with a small smile. "Dad," she said, her voice gentle, I don't think I ever understood before what it means to love with strength. I thought loyalty meant staying, no matter what. But you showed me something different. You showed me that love sometimes means walking away, setting boundaries, even when it hurts. Her words sank deep into me. For years, I had confused sacrifice with love. I thought that giving everything away, time, money, energy, was the only way to prove my devotion. But all that did was enable lies to grow. Looking at Emily now, I realized that by saying enough, I had not abandoned her. I had protected her in the truest sense. I didn't feel strong, Em, I admitted, sipping the bitter coffee. I felt broken. But sometimes strength comes disguised as breaking. What matters is what we choose after. She leaned her head on my shoulder like she had when she was a little girl. I'm grateful, Dad. I don't know if I ever said that enough. Thank you for not letting me sink with him. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. In that stillness, I found myself thinking about how betrayal, as painful as it is, can become a strange kind of teacher. David's deceit had cut deep, but it had also forced Emily to confront her own worth, and it had reminded me of mine. That evening we shared a simple dinner, roast chicken, bread, and a jar of peaches I had canned last summer. Emily laughed for the first time in weeks when the jar lid popped too loudly, startling us both. The sound was small, but it carried hope. Later, as dusk settled and the horizon blazed with streaks of orange and violet, I stood at the window and watched the last light spread across the fields. The mountains caught the glow, their edges sharp against the fading sky. In that view, I saw not just the close of a day, but the closing of an old life. And in its place, a new one unfolding, not free from pain, but filled with a clarity I hadn't known before. I thought about Margaret, about all the years I had tried to live up to her memory by overprotecting Emily. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe true love, whether between spouses or parents and children, wasn't about shielding one another from every hardship, but about teaching resilience, about reminding each other that dignity and truth must come first. When Emily came to stand beside me at the window, I spoke the thoughts aloud. You know, Em, family isn't about carrying each other blindly. It's about lifting each other into honesty. Sometimes that means saying no. Sometimes that means letting go. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. I think I understand now. Love without respect isn't love at all, and respect starts with telling the truth. Her words were steady, and I could hear the woman she had become in them. The night deepened, stars scattering across the sky, each one a reminder that even in darkness, light remains. As I prepared to turn in, I left Emily with one last thought, one that had grown inside me since the storm began. Life, I said, has a way of giving us second chances disguised as heartbreak. Don't waste them. Don't be afraid to start again, no matter your age, no matter what others think. Peace and happiness aren't privileges, they're choices, and it's never too late to choose them. I don't know what tomorrow holds. The courts will decide David's fate, and the town will chatter as it always does. But inside this house, there is honesty again. There is respect. There is room for healing. And for the first time in a long time, I feel not just like a father who survived betrayal, but like a man who found his own dignity again. As the fire in the hearth dimmed and the quiet of the night wrapped around us, I knew the message was simple, but true. Love with courage, draw your boundaries, and trust that even after the harshest winters, spring always comes. Life has a way of testing the strength of its bonds, often revealing truths that were buried under years of silence, compromise, or misplaced loyalty. Betrayal and disappointment sting not only because of what is lost, but because of what they force us to confront within ourselves, the fragility of trust, the cost of denial, and the courage it takes to finally draw a line. Yet even in the wreckage of deceit, there lies the possibility of renewal. When boundaries are finally honored, love takes on its truest form. Not blind sacrifice, but respect, honesty, and accountability. It is in the act of saying enough that dignity is reclaimed and lives are rebuilt. Forgiveness may or may not follow, but freedom does. And with that freedom comes the chance to rediscover peace, to step out from the weight of shadows and into the light of self-worth. This story reminds us that the measure of a life is not in how much we give away to others at the expense of ourselves, but in how we nurture integrity in the face of hardship. It is not selfish to demand respect, nor is it cruel to let go of what corrodes the soul. True compassion does not mean enabling, but empowering ourselves and those we love to face the truth, however painful it may be. Every ending carries within it the seed of a beginning. Heartbreak can carve space for wisdom. Betrayal can awaken courage. And when the dust settles, what remains is the quiet strength to choose a different path. No matter the age, no matter the past, it is never too late to honor one's worth, to stand in truth, and to embrace the simple yet profound gift of starting over. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.